This episode challenges the hype around AI and is a critical conversation for anyone working in technology or planning to leverage AI. Today we have two special guests, Dr. Emily M. Bender and Dr. Alex Hanna, the authors of The AI Con: How to Fight Big Tech's Hype and Create the Future We Want. In this episode we cover the exaggerations and limitations of AI and LLMs, how until we know how LLMs are trained, we can't trust them or build around their biases, how focusing on assisting users is critical, not on replacing users, that workers must stand up and resist AI automation, and the damage caused by AI hype boosters and doomers.
My concern with the LLMs that everyone thinks about, so Gemini, ChatGPT, Claude, all of these things, is that they are built on absolutely enormous, poorly curated and undisclosed training sets. And so we don't really know what's in there. We don't have the ability to start reasoning about the kinds of biases that we would want to mitigate for particular use cases.
Dr. Emily M. Bender is a professor of linguistics at the University of Washington, where she's also the faculty director of the Computational Linguistics Masters of Science program and affiliate faculty in the School of Computer Science and Engineering and the Information School. In 2023, she was included in the inaugural Time 100 list of the most influential people in AI.
Do robots feel pain? Those are not useful conversations right now. The useful conversations are the ways in which these technologies are supplanting work, are being used as a means to devalue the work of people, to attack existing institutions.
Dr. Alex Hanna is Director of Research at the Distributed AI Research Institute and a lecturer in the School of Information at the University of California, Berkeley. Dr. Bender and Dr. Hanna are also the hosts of the Mystery AI Hype Theater 3000 podcast, where they take on the latest news from AI and technology.
Being a software engineer is more than just writing code. And even if you can automate in a janky way the output of code that sometimes helps you, that doesn't mean you've automated software engineering.
A lot of workers get accused of being Luddites, and they get accused of being anti-technology because they're worried about the intrusion of this work into their workplaces. And it might get sold as augmenting human ability and human skill. But the reality is they are developed and they're rolled out and they become replacements for actual human work and creativity and care when they can do nothing of the such.
Thank you for listening to the Design of AI podcast. If you like this episode, please follow us on your favorite podcasting app and leave us a review. This episode is brought to you by PH1 Research, a research and strategy consultancy specialized in the mapping of the future of your business and product. Get more information at ph1.ca.
Hello, Emily and Alex. I am so excited to have you here because of your book, The AI Con. I received an advanced copy of it, and it is essential reading. It is absolutely a mandatory thing for anybody working in technology so that they can get a bit of a reality check of what's happening with AI, its history, and honestly why this industry needs a bit of a scathing critique. But before we go into any of the critiques itself, I'd love to hear your vision of technology and where we're all going.
Vision of technology and where we're all going. First of all, thank you so much for having us on your show. I'm glad for this chance to talk to your audience. I think that technology is, first of all, been around as long as people, right? We build things to help us do things. And, my vision of the best way forward for technology is technology that is really controlled by the people who are using it, who it will be used on, and who are doing the sort of on-the-ground work of building it. And so I would love to get to a world where our technology is not highly centralized as it is right now, but actually much more distributed.
Also, thank you for having us on. Just to completely agree with Emily, I think where we're going is probably not the best track when it comes to technology. We see the implications of power and politics and everything in the building of our technology right now, where technology is working for a small few. So if technology is to work for people, we need to think about new methods and new ways of thinking that are community-based, that are based in people's needs, where kind of the means of computation are in the hands of people who know what their needs are, and we have processes to solicit feedback in true and meaningful ways, including the power to say, no, I don't want what you're building for me. Let's start again and think of something different.
The people listening, many of them are building with AI, they're relying on it, they're using it. I'd love to hear from your perspective. What is AI good at? What should we be using it for?
To even answer a question like that, we first have to define what we mean by AI. And the problem with that term is that it doesn't refer to a coherent set of technologies. So right now, a lot of the excitement around things that are called AI is actually around large language models. And I'm a computational linguist. This is what I do. Language modeling comes out of my field. And I'm here to tell you that these are not reasoning engines. They are not thinking. They are not really even having conversations. Chatbots are conversation simulators built on models of the distributions of word forms in text, which means which letters go where, literally. And the problem is that as people, we are so good at making sense of language, and we are so used to doing that by imagining what the person who said the words was trying to tell us, that as soon as we see the synthetic text, we make sense of it. And so if what you mean by AI is large language models, then I suspect that a lot of your listeners could be saving themselves a lot of grief by turning to other technology for what they're trying to do.
And when we say that the current batch of LLMs are good at word predicting, what is necessary for them to get to a point of reasoning in any form or capacity?
There's a presupposition in your question that there's a path from language modeling to reasoning, and I don't think there is. So reasoning is a big set of problems that has to do with building a model of the world, building in rules or patterns for how to get from one set of facts to some set of conclusions, and so on. And you could imagine doing something that is very intensely language-based, but it still wouldn't be, well, what's a likely next word to come next?
So how would you define reasoning? And are there any breakthroughs in that? How would we know if reasoning has happened?
None of that is actually my job, right? I'm not actually trying to build AI systems, but what my job is building language technology and understanding how language works. And so my advice to somebody who is asking questions like what you're asking is to say, well, what's the specific task that I'm trying to automate? What is the input that I have available? How will the user be using the output? And how do I build something so that the user has the information that they need to use the output in an appropriate and reliable way?
Now, obviously, me talking about reasoning adds to the bullshit. And my favorite line from your book, and you say it every week on your show, is every time we think we've reached the summit of Bullshit Mountain, there's more to come. What's essential for our audience to know about this hype? What is the bullshit? Why is there such a big mountain? And why is it so important to highlight it?
So, yeah, this line is great. This line is fantastic. This is thanks to our producer, Christy Taylor. I think it was the initial author of this line. So AI hype is a thing that exists where there is a technology and it does this thing, notably word prediction, next to word prediction, very well, or not that well in some cases. It's doing this parlor trick. And there's so many different types of hype that exist that get built on that, right? And so when we say that whenever we think there's the top of bullshit mountain, there's more to come, it's because the hype looks like many different things. It looks like it's comparing machines to people. That's one move in the hype book, and that's been around as long as AI, quote unquote, AI has been around. So 1956, when Marvin Minsky and John McCarthy were developing these technologies, or they wanted to have a workshop around, quote unquote, thinking machines, Minsky is quoted to say, we could probably build a circuit that is so good that it could mimic what humans do kind of in their everyday thinking. So that's an element of hype, this comparison to humans. And so we see these kinds of elements where there are AI agents or AI tutors or AI secretaries, AI fill in the blank human role. Okay. So that is definitely an element of hype in what we see in the world. Whenever we see some kind of claim that there could be wide swaths of human tasks automated perfectly and kind of with no paid points, this is also an element of AI hype. And we're seeing this kind of at the large scale in our federal government, in which many people have been issued a reduction in workforce, a reduction in force orders. And there's this claim that you're going to replace these workers that have so much institutional knowledge. That's hype. The idea that you could translate years and decades of COBOL at the Social Security Administration in the US government and translate it into Java, that is hype. And so we see these different hype instantiations in so many different ways, and it has particular forms. One, the replacement of humans, kind of this one-to-one replacement, and this reduction of humans into electronic circuitry or neural networks or whatnot.
So there's no doubt there's a giant hype mountain. It's full of bullshit. I totally agree. If there was a comparable, sister mountain next to it, which is actually the ways in which LLMs are useful, what would they be? What are the areas in which you're proud or perhaps comfortable with the champion of those use cases?
So they have to be use cases where what you're interested in is a good match for modeling the distribution of word forms in text. And language modeling as a technology is actually pretty old. It goes back to the work of Claude Shannon in the 1940s, and it's an important component of systems like automatic transcription and machine translation, where you have some component in the system that says, here's the words that input signal, so words in another language or audio, might have been. And then you use the language model to say, well, of those various possibilities, which one of these looks most likely given the training data? That is actually quite useful. And the current transformer-based approaches allow us to have a much finer model of the distribution of the word forms in text, and so we get increases in performance in those technologies. My concern with the LLMs that everyone thinks about, so Gemini, ChatGPT, Claude, all of these things, is that they are built on absolutely enormous, poorly curated and undisclosed training sets. And so we don't really know what's in there. We don't have the ability to start reasoning about the kinds of biases that we would want to mitigate for particular use cases. And sort of beyond that, folks have shown, and I'm sorry, I could look up the citation for your show notes, that Whisper, for example, which comes from OpenAI, which is an automatic transcription system based on large language modeling technology, will sometimes output just random strings that weren't in the audio input at all. And that's because the architecture has changed from really being tightly coupled input to output to effectively letting the language model do its text fabrication thing a little bit too much. And of course, you're going to get all the biases super amplified in that as well. So the collection of use cases, if you put them next to Bullshit Mountain, wouldn't even be a foothill. Right? But there is a collection of positive use cases for this kind of technology.
I like to tell people that it's equivalent to living in a village and there's a person in the town square who's really loud, but you can't tell if he's the village idiot or the village genius because there's no one who can counter him in some respect. And these LLMs are so big, they're trained with so much information that they appear like geniuses, but they might be absolutely stupid. Is that part of the foundational problem? Because we really don't know how that data has been used, what's countering what rules are baked into it.
So there's two issues. One is the unknown data, right? But the other is synthetic text. So just repeatedly answering the question, what's a likely word to come next, can make something that looks very convincing and reads as very confident, but it is never actually working with the input data as information. It's working with the input data as word spellings. And I hear you about the village idiot, village genius metaphor, but that's already a little bit too anthropomorphizing for me.
So Alec, maybe you can comment on what are the dangers of anthropomorphizing?
Yeah, the danger is to grant, as Emily had suggested, this notion that there is a mind behind the words and that there is any kind of mutual meaning making that's happening between these word prediction machines, right? And so we make meaning with people in different ways. We make meaning through shared experiences, intersubjectivity, which I believe is the linguistic word. I'm not a linguist, I'm a sociologist, but I've learned a lot from Emily. This kind of shared meaning is one thing. We're granting then into some conversations which are not the central conversations, not the useful ones, like, do robots have rights? There was this terrible article by Kevin Roos, New York Times journalist, who is much too credulous for these technologies, in which he's having these conversations. Do robots feel pain? Those are not useful conversations right now. I mean, the useful conversations are the ways in which these technologies are supplanting work, are being used as a means to devalue the work of people, to attack existing institutions, to not shore up the kind of divestment in existing social and political institutions that we've had for decades. But it's kind of the latest line of tools to promise that it's going to be this breakthrough. So anthropomorphizing has that function. It also has the function of reducing the notion of who is and what it means to be human. In the kind of worst case, Sam Altman had some kind of case in which he said, riffing off a paper that Emily was an author on, as well as the executive director and founder of DARE, where I work, to meet to brew, where they had written on the dangers of stochastic parrots. And Altman had remarked, I'm a stochastic parrot, and so are you. So this kind of notion that there's a reduction of the human to kind of a means of kind of a mechanical or complex word prediction machines.
And how do you two feel about this vision that's being laid out by many, quote unquote, thought leaders that we as humans need to shift over to orchestrating roles, that we ultimately will be the operators of the assembly lines, but the robots will do the work? How does that make you feel? Does that make your blood boil over?
Yeah, I mean, I think it also it's a very narrow idea of what work is. If you think about all of the kinds of work in the world, think about especially care work. So caring for the elderly, caring for children, being a teacher, working in a hospital, all of that is so like intensely human to human. And when it's like, well, we're just going to sit back and run, Alex and I on our podcast recently went through this terrible artifact called AI 2027. And there's this like vision of this fictional company called Open Brain, where there was the human AI engineers, and then they start just sort of managing teams of artificial machine AI engineers. And I think that a lot of times when people make those pronouncements, they just imagine that the only kind of work in the world is the work that they do. And even the work that they do, they take a very reductionist view to it, right? So being a software engineer is more than just writing code, for example. And even if you can automate in a janky way the output of code that sometimes helps you, that doesn't mean you've automated software engineering.
There was a survey of U.S. workers that Pew did, and it found that I think only about 17% of U.S. workers had used these tools in any capacity. It should be noted that I think 1% said that they had used them like intensely, and then 16% were like, oh, some of the time. And yes, there is a very AI-centric view in which it says, oh, we're going to automate so much different work. So it really misunderstands what work is, what it means to labor. And there's an idea that these things are going to do this stuff well, or whatever quote unquote work is. And that's not even the case. I think there had been another study that said that in the cases in which there was code writing that had been done, it tended to be that the output was pretty low quality, or there had to be a lot more oversight on this. And there's been other research that's shown that it's been introducing more bugs into code writing. And there was an older study with Copilot done by the independent research agency MITRE that had said that there had been the reintroduction of a lot of existing security vulnerabilities. And so security has been a huge issue. A lot of the cases in which companies haven't adopted or have become cold in adopting LLMs has been because of security issues and cybersecurity issues. And so the idea that we're going to simply be the minders, I think, has a really poor understanding of what kind of future actually lays ahead of us. There's an idea that we're going to have nurses or doctors, where Bill Gates claimed that nursing and doctoring and teaching is going to be wholly the ambit of LLMs in about 10 years, which is just patently false. I mean, there's no way, especially because, it fundamentally misunderstands what doctors, nurses, and teachers do, which is, building these relationships, aiding people through their day-to-day, comforting people in their times of need, not simply dispensing of knowledge.
How do you feel that a lot of the papers coming out now are published by the AI hype men? They're published by Microsoft. They're published by Anthropic. How does that feel as academics who contributed your life to this work?
So first of all, they're not published in the same sense, right? Many of these papers are just called preprints and thrown up on archive, or not even that, and they're just on company websites. And preprints, originally the idea was the publishing process is slow, this paper is finished, it's past peer review, and I want it to be accessible to people, and it's going to take, months or whatever for it to show up in the conference or the journal. So fine. But now it's like, peer review, who's that? Right? Never heard of her. Let's just throw this out in the world. And that's frustrating. What's even more frustrating is the degree to which these then get attention, especially media attention. I like to say that science is a conversation, and you could do really interesting work and get some really interesting results. But if you've just kept it to yourself, you haven't done science. But a really important part of that conversation is the peer review process. And peer review is not perfect. There's all kinds of issues in that system. But the idea that we collectively look at something and we look at it critically and it's a good kind of gatekeeping, I think. And it's not gatekeeping in the sense that we're saying who can and can't publish, but which papers do and do not meet the bar of scientific rigor. And a lot of these things that we've taken to calling paper-shaped objects absolutely do not meet the bar of scientific rigor. And we have a lot of fun with that on our podcast.
I'd also say there is a privileging of a certain discipline in doing this work, right? I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding of what science is. And in the artifact we reviewed last time on the podcast, the AI 2027 one, there was a kind of a notion of that there was kind of science that would just be done by the LLMs, which is kind of a misunderstanding of what science is. First, it kind of imagines that anything that makes progress in LLMs is the only science, which is patently absurd, right? I mean, there is so much more that is being done in every different kind of field. And this is done with a lot of different mechanisms, right? It's with people who are coming from diverse backgrounds. It's people who are on these NIH grants, these NSF grants, agencies which are being absolutely gutted at the federal government in the US right now. And we're losing out just on a generation of trainees in this. That's not to say that these were perfect programs by any means, but the kind of crown jewel of US higher education was these programs and the ability to train people to do this. There's no way that these machines that take existing training data and produce things that look, predicting new things, as if that is going to replace those point of views, those scientific breakthroughs. Ask any historian of science or any kind of philosopher of science. This is not how this work gets done.
Now, in your book, you even lay out a case that the peer review process is getting infected by LLMs. What happens to the idea of knowledge and science in a world where we don't know who did the work and what it was based on and their intention?
The fundamental issue there is who's accountable for it. It's important to understand the positionality of the people who've done the work. That's one thing. And it's important that anything that happens in language, we interpret based on who we think actually has responsibility and accountability for it. And yes, there are issues with the peer review process getting sort of snowed under because now it's very easy to create paper-shaped objects, and people sometimes do throw those into peer review. And it's very hard to get the volunteer labor lined up to do the reviewing because it is volunteer labor in most systems. And then sometimes you get people who have bought into the hype who think that it's okay to put the paper into one of these services like ChatGPT and take what comes back out as a review and then send that into the peer review system, which is just a mockery, right? Yes, peer review is one of those things that happens in text. But again, the point is not the words on the page. It's the thinking that went into the words on the page.
Now, if we zoom out this idea of the hype men, who are the big hype men? Are they the billionaires? Are they all of us on the ground who are handing control in our photos and our private information to these documents? Who is really behind the hype of this?
There's a lot of different hype men. It's to say suggested is necessarily the culpability of people like you and I who are small-time content creators or academics is probably not the case. It's more of the people who are in control of these large companies, your Sam Altmans, your Dario Amadeus, and also their funders. So Andreessen Horowitz, Sequoia Capital, SoftBank, and then the people who are funding those at big tech companies, so your Satya Nadellas, your Sundar Pichais, your Brad Smiths. I mean, those are people who are major players just in terms of the people who are institutionally your major hype men. You also have a lot of people who are the architects of very, very disturbing ideologies like the test wheel bundle, the transhumanists, extropianists, singularians, cosmicisms. Your people like Eliza Yudkowsky, people who are these AI doomers, people who think that if we optimize things to a certain degree, we're going to have perfect morality. Your Nick Bostroms, the long term, people take this long termist view. I mean, so those are people that may not have the same kind of financial stake in the game, but definitely have the ideological one. And then I think there's a lot of people that go ahead and parrot those a lot in journalistic media. I mean, people that have a lot of cultural capital and media power. You mentioned Kevin Roose, for instance, as somebody that had been very credulous when it comes to AI work. We've also seen a little bit with Casey Newton at Platformer. I mean, so we've seen journalists who have been very taken by a lot of these technologies in a way that we hold doesn't offer much criticism, is not doing the job of journalism. To be a journalist is to, I would hold, not to rely so much on access to these large institutions, but to hold power to account, to understand what's the incentive of these narratives, who's behind it, who benefits, and who gets harmed in the process.
So you mentioned incentives. 15 years ago, I saw Ray Kurzweil, who's the author of The Singularity. It's a concept that ultimately technology and humans will merge. Clearly, you're critical of that concept, and rightfully so. But I have to say, as someone who was in the audience, who read his book, it's compelling. You almost want it to be true. You almost want to believe that the future is going to be Star Trek. What do you think the incentive is for us as audiences, as normal humans, to want that kind of techno-utopian future?
That's a great question. And as a Trekkie myself, I mean, we love to think that the easiest way of getting there is for someone else to do it for us. And I think that's a lot of the vision. If we have with this technology, it's going to build some kind of a singular consciousness, and it's going to lead us to this fully automated luxury communism, right? Something that we forget about Star Trek, The Next Generation, is even to get there was a lot of pain and strife. They had the eugenesis wars, which wasn't about eugenicism and race. It was about superhuman people. So Khan, that famous
Star Trek 2.
Star Trek, where where Will Shatner goes Khan, so like Khan is this element of this person in which there's massive genocidal violence. In Deep Space Nine, there's the Bell riots in which people are massively dispossessed. It actually occurs in 2024, if you can believe that, in the lore. And there's this massive dispossession of people in encampments across every major city in the US, right? And so these things actually come from massive strife and kind of reorganization, and is not coming from this kind of merging of minds electronically or this alien consciousness. And I think the vision there comes from a ceding of control. We need someone to guide us to the promised land. It's got this weird kind of Christian vibe to it. I think really the reality is like the only people who are going to save us is us. In the case of massive state dispossession or state abandonment, I mean, the kind of idea is that the people who are actually going to help us get through is going to be people who are banding together, who are looking for alternatives when the state has abandoned them. We're defending each other. And I would say that the kind of vision of singularityism and the vision of all these different ideologies is an authoritarian one that says that we were going to take care of you. Mark Andreessen has said so, and Sam Altman has said so. We're going to be in a state of limitless abundance in which machines are going to produce so much, and we're not going to have scarcity. But that's not the case, especially the case where people don't have control of their livelihoods and their futures. And so it's kind of the easy way out. But there's no easy way out. There are no shortcuts, to paraphrase organizer Jane McElvey.
So about a year ago, I saw people lining up around the block to get their retinas scanned for the Sam Altman WorldCoin project. They have no idea what they're signing up for. They have no idea what they're giving away, and they have no idea what they're even getting back. So I need to ask, if we've been through this hype with crypto and it's gone up and down, but all the hype men will say, well, it continues to go up. What is a logical counter to that argument? Because we're technically right and they're technically right. So it seems like an impasse.
The whole WorldCoin and retina scan thing is, we live in a world where some things are overtly valued, right? So you can change cryptocurrency into real money at a specific value at a specific time. And something like privacy and the impact of giving up personal biometric information is more difficult to value because it doesn't have a dollar sign on it. And similarly, sort of the chance to be human together with other people, that sort of person-to-person connection and the opportunity to band together, as Alex was talking about, extremely valuable, but not going to have a price on it in the same way. And I think that's part of the impasse. And I would never cede the ground that the ones with the dollar signs are more real because there's specific numbers.
I'd also say with regard to the WorldCoin, I mean, you have to also see where WorldCoin was operating. They had a lot of effort to do this in Kenya and South Africa. There were places in the majority world in which there was incentives being offered to give something of a likeness or to scan a retina to give this biometric information. So there's cases in which the incentives are pulled against people. We also saw this with regards to crypto, in which maintaining crypto was seen as kind of a more secure investment in places in which fiat currency had been at more of a risk. That's not an issue. That's not some innovation in crypto. That's taking advantage of an extractive colonial economy in which inflation has gone out of control. So there's hype around it, but I mean, like, you can hype better than pointing to that and saying, like, this is offering real economic independence for people in the majority world. But no, that's taking advantage of post-colonial situations in the majority world. That's not offering economic independence.
In your book, there's two types of clans that are big characters. So you have the AI doomers and the boosters. Can you walk us through who they are and why you believe that neither of them really represents the types of conversations that we should be having?
They are two sides of the same coin. You've got the boosters who say, any moment now, this is going to be AGI and it's going to give us fully automated luxury communism. And it's going to solve all our problems. It's going to solve climate change. It's going to cure cancer. It's going to lead to this age of superabundance. And then you've got the doomers who are saying, it's going to kill us all. It's going to turn into the paperclip maximizer or whatever and decide that humans aren't important because it's got its goal and so on. And in the media, those two are often set up as the sort of extremes of the range that you can be in. So you're either fully for it because it's going to be great, or you're fully against it because it's going to kill us all. And that is the full range of discourse. But from where we sit, it's actually all the same story. It's all this idea that these systems that are, in particular, the synthetic text extruding machines, are somehow going to combust into consciousness and be awesome, or combust into consciousness and be terrible. And none of that is based in reality. And it's been very frustrating when the media sort of frames it as, well, here's the full range. And so Emily and Alex, you're somewhere in the middle there, right? And it's like, no, actually, we're over here laughing at all those guys. And so they ended up being sort of the opening of the book. And then we get into the doomers again in the penultimate chapter. And it was a bit of a struggle because, like, we don't want to let them frame the whole thing, but also it is framing so much of the discourse that we had to talk about it some. So that's how we chose to do it.
So we said at the top that a lot of the audience are people actively building with AI or leveraging in some form. Where should they sit in this dialogue? What is a reasonable criticism that they should walk into their job with? What is the type of conversation they should be having with their coworkers and their bosses and their investors that is responsible to them trying to make a living, but also responsible to their commitments to society and humanity as a whole?
People at work need to start thinking about what these systems are, what they're purported to do, and how they're supposed to make things easier for them at work or for their consumers. It's really hard to push back because it seems like every single company is shoving quote unquote AI into everything. You open up your new app or an app you've been using for years, and then you see this kind of sparkle emoji. And I'm very upset because that sparkle emoji is a great emoji and it's been taken over by AI, and it's very upsetting. And it also gives this patina of these things are magic or witchcraft. And that's very upsetting for people who know actual witches and are very enamored with that. There's a lot of very basic questions. We offer this at the end of the book. What are the inputs and outputs of such a system? You could think of examples that make no sense, like inputting an image of a human face and having it tell if that person is a criminal. That certainly isn't the case. Criminality is something that is socially defined, as we're very much seeing in our current era in the US. This certainly doesn't carry any water. What's the data that is trained on? Is that data going to be helpful? When people say it's something that's trained on the quote unquote whole internet, no, it's not. Like, what is the whole internet? There's a great study that came out of AI 2 in which Jesse Dodge and some of his co-authors were looking into one of these data sets that is used in a lot of training. It's called C4. So first, most of it was English, and Emily has a rule named after herself called the Bender rule when you consider a language model. Doesn't consider any languages other than English. Yeah. So you usually have to name what that is. A lot of that text in that data set had been automatically translated. I think a lot of that was Japanese patents. And so where's the data actually coming from? So that's a critical question. How is it evaluated? Typically, these companies are not releasing any evaluation metrics. Evaluation itself is a poorly defined field. There's great work from our collaborator, Deb Raji, in trying to say, how do we move to more systematic evaluation of language models? But right now, the evaluation is very slapdash. These things that are called benchmarks are not actually very good at what they're actually trying to measure. They're not independent. They're internally made, and they hew very close to the training. And so people who are actually building with these things need to really evaluate what's actually behind the screen, what's going in, what's coming out, what's in the data, how's it evaluated, how's it going to be useful for your actual work.
So our next guest is someone who's a founder of an organization working on emotional AI, so evaluating emotions based on facial movements. This obviously can have valiant use cases or some nefarious ones. What would you counsel such a person who's building this kind of thing? Would you tell them to stop building it? Would you give them some specific advice? Like, help us understand how to guide the builders of these sorts of platforms, please.
So that's a use case that I have a really hard time validating as a worthwhile one. I think the questions that I would ask is, first of all, what's your intended use case, but how else might this be used? And how is it going to be weaponized against people? So something that purports to measure emotions, or ironically, I've got my cat purring close to the microphone. So
definitely hear the purr.
But to bring that into the conversation, we believe that a purr is a sign of contentment in cats, and we interpret it that way. And similarly, we take a smile as a sign of joy or friendliness or something. But there's many different reasons that somebody might show something on their face that's at odds with how they're feeling. They might feel pressure to show something. People who are not neurotypical might actually have a very difficult time making their face show what they're feeling inside in a way that's interpretable by people around them. And so you can very quickly end up with these systems getting weaponized against people. There's also the fact that the systems are not equally effective in handling faces across different skin tones. And so you could imagine that you could very quickly get differentially bad outputs for people with darker skin. And so all of these are things that I'm worried about.
Yeah. And
Did you want to add something else?
Yeah. I mean, just for regards to the advice to this person, I'd roundly say don't do this. I mean, it's kind of mimics a lot of prior technologies that attempted to show emotions. I mean, there's a great paper by Luke Stark and Jevon Hutton in a law journal in which they call this physiognomic AI. And they kind of any assessment of kind of internal states that are in the assessments, it really harks back to this early vision of physiognometry, in which there kind of internal states, whether it's criminality or personality, determined by individuals' faces and what they look like. As Emily mentioned, very clear kind of racial implications, ones that are based on ability. But it's also the case that you're also changing behavior of people. There's reporting in which students do try to do some training in these, in which they are like actually trying to see their faces and train their faces to kind of comport with the training of this to seem more typical. But there's so much in which this is culturally dependent. This is dependent on how people are in different environments. And it's really going to harm the people the least suited to, and not in a majoritarian class of people in terms of race, ethnicity, nationality, and whatnot.
Now, that puts people in a tough position because, again, from a typical commerce perspective, the idea of automating customer service requests seems reasonable. And to do that does require us to understand the context of conversation, what people's intentions are, and how to route those appropriately to the best resource possible. So to those types of people who are tackling human use cases, how can they do that in the most appropriate way possible? Are there some guidelines that you'd like to suggest or recommend?
So I think stepping away from this is an automated customer service agent to this is an automated system that we use to help the customer connect to the right resource, sort of making it a narrower use case and making it very transparent to the user about what it actually can and can't do is fine, right? If you think about the press or say one phone menus, those are a little bit annoying, but you know what it's going to do. If you've gone through 5 options and none of them match what you're looking for, then you know that that menu can't do the thing you're looking for. And you hope for the press 0 to talk to a person directly kind of a thing, right? So those are annoying, but it does have the value in design that it is very clear what it can and can't do. And if we're doing something that is a natural language interface, we have to work extra hard to maintain that transparency because natural language, as we use it, is very flexible. And so it's going to look more flexible than it is. So if you basically empower the user to know what it is that they can expect to get out of the system, then you can also set it up so that the system isn't expected to be able to reason about, let's say, systems that can't reason, it's not expected to be able to reason about where the person's coming from, how agitated they are, things like this. Another example, turns out that automatic speech systems perform worse when people get agitated because we speak differently. And so we're different from the training data. And so you could imagine wanting a system that can detect when that's happened. And the nice thing is you actually don't have to detect agitation. You can just detect, oh, this audio signal is different to the range of things that were in the training data, and so therefore take these actions. Right? So I think basically stepping away from this thing is human-like and stepping away from this thing is set up to detect emotions positions you to actually make more effective automation.
A running conversation through AI space right now is whether the focus should be augmenting human capabilities or automating. And Alex, you've touched on this quite a bit, that the current hype train is really trying to degrade worker rights. In your book, there was a quote that really stuck with me that they, in this case, LLMs, are also a scabbing worker, crossing a picket line at the behest of an employer who wants to signal to the picketeers that they're disposable. Can you describe the qualities that define AI as an agent of social fabric destruction versus AI as a potential agent of positive worker and economic change?
I think we've seen this in a lot of different struggles. This was a major theme in the Writers Guild of America strike, in which the Hollywood writers who are not living glamorous jobs, I mean, these are folks who are piecing together multiple writing gigs to stay afloat. And in the negotiations, in addition to being a major contention around residuals from suing services, these workers were also opposing this kind of notion of the AI tools being in the writer's room. It was posed as possibly it's in the writer's room. You might have to do rewriting of a script that might be produced or the output of a synthetic text model. But writers also knew that in that they had the potential of being handed a script and having to rewrite it and being paid a rewriting rate, which is much lower than the writing rate, the cost of producing original content. And so the clues are basically, it might be presented as a labor saving tool, but because of how these industries are structured, these are ways to undermine the actual humans doing this work. We mentioned a survey in one of the chapters in which I think about a third of artists, graphic designers had reported that they had lost work due to the introduction of these tools. So these are being brought in to do graphic design. And if there are people they are being rehired to correct the outputs of that work. Just since we published a book, there's been reporting for folks that this is being done in the video game industry, and it's being done now in the federal government, whether it means oversight and trying to correct these outputs. I think a lot of workers get accused of being Luddites, and if you've read the book, you know that we don't think the word Luddites is a bad word. It's actually a good word, but they get accused of being anti-technology because they are worried about the intrusion of this work into their workplaces. And it might get sold as augmenting human ability and human skill. But the reality is they are developed and they're rolled out and they become replacements for actual human work and creativity and care when they can do nothing of the such.
So Initification was the word of the year, continues to be. It seems like LLMs are really taking the soul out of a lot of things, I guess you could say. And when we talk about the creative worlds, music in particular, so we've spoken to a lot of musicians on this show, and it's really tragic what's happening. But you have an industry that's really pushing and crushing people to fit into algorithmic pressures on a marketing end. And on the other end, you're supplanting the even need for creativity. So when I hear this piece about a scavenging worker, I am also hearing the tension in people's homes when an employer might force their employee to learn something or get out, or the idea that you're hearing constantly you're going to get replaced, or this idea that if you don't keep up, you're a Luddite. How can we help these people? And it's something that I personally struggle with so much that I just don't know what our role should be as champions on this topic. Should it be educating them on how to adopt this? Or should it be normalizing that they don't need to?
I definitely vote for normalizing refusal. And that refusal can be individual, and sometimes we are very empowered to do that. But as Alex was talking about before, actually the only people who are going to help us is us. And we are more able to refuse the more we band together and the more we have solidarity. And so I think that one of the issues in the current era is that the people selling the hype want to say that this is all new, this is all different. But in fact, if you look at it, and this is what a lot of Alex has been saying, it's the same old story. It is exploitation of workers, and that is as old as capitalism, right? And so the strategies for resisting are similar, and I think that part of the work of puncturing the AI hype is to sort of pull back that curtain and help people see that the strategies are going to be similar.
Initification is one of the modes of what's happening. I want to say that the initification failure mode, if you can call it that, kind of starts when there's a product that seems to be helpful initially, and then because of the need for limitless growth, it becomes inshitified. So Cory Doctorow, when he talks about this term, he talks about Google search, and search wasn't perfect to start for sure. And we have folks like Sophia Noble who pointed out that, search perpetuated these awful kinds of stereotypes about Black girls. And so that is a case where there was a product that was nominally useful, but then now has become this AI overview, and then all these suggested ads, and then finally you might find something halfway down the page which is much more useful. And the argument in the book is not that ChatGPT is inshitified, it's that it's bad on arrival, right? I mean, this is a thing that's not producing any kind of useful outputs. The kind of inshitification argument, if it were to work, is that maybe this is nominally useful at one's job, kind of for writing code or maybe kind of an initial playing around, but then it becomes this thing in which employers rely on so heavily, it becomes required in your work. And we're actually seeing that. And we talk about this in the book, and it has come to pass in which we say, well, there might be a day where it's not optional. We're seeing this at tech companies. You have to use these tools. You have to quote unquote, be more productive, even though you can't validate the outputs of what's happening here in your code and your writing or whatnot. You just kind of have to take it for given. If you took the careful time to actually validate this, you'd be left in the dust, right? Just to reiterate what Emily said, the refusal looks collective. It looks like, okay, I can push back at this at work. There's no reasonable way to integrate this. That's not going to lead to a play. That's going to actually lead to a more quality product. But because I don't have the time to validate this at work, I'm being forced to do all this stuff and deal with these really shitty outputs at the end of the day.
So it's easy to sit here and say the billionaires are assholes, the government is taking all the guardrails away, and that we as workers need to stand up and fight. But with technology becoming such an important industry and such a key part of the economy as a whole, what is the path forward? Do you see a path where resistance is even possible? Do you see a path where the LLMs shut down and hit a failure point? Like what is a path forward aside from accepting this as the norm?
Yeah, resistance is always an option, and tech workers are workers, right? And they can come together in solidarity amongst themselves and across industries. So just because tech is big and is important doesn't mean it doesn't have workers. But also, this looks like a bubble. The amount of money that's gone in, and then there's someone from Sequoia Capital that we quote in the book saying, yeah, what is it, 600 billion? Was it, Alex? Some enormous number
Yeah.
has been put in.
Yeah, the 600 problem, I think he called, it was David Kahn at Sequoia Capital. He's effectively said that AI has to turn over a profit of, or rather, not even profit, I mean revenue of 600 billion. We're not even there. I think the revenue that we're seeing in this, it's something like 10 or 20 billion being reported. It's minuscule in comparison to the investment in hardware and labor that these companies have to turn over. So we're already seeing these kind of hints that the bubble is deflating. Folks are going to point to this recent cash investment in OpenAI, in which they were given $40 billion in investment bank by SoftBank. This is kind of like the dying throes, honestly. We have to throw so much money on this, and the promise is that we're going to have limitless productivity. When Satya Nadella was in an interview where he said, where's the 10% growth that we were shown that we had in the Industrial Revolution, in which there was an invention of the steam engine? It's not there, and it's not going to come. This is the big year of enterprise and LLMs and generative AI. We're seeing this in the discussion of agents. Now OpenAI is offering this PhD level agent, which is supposed to be a quote unquote PhD level of intelligence at any task. They're throwing stuff at the wall, and it's not going to stick. So that's one of the things in terms of resistance that we can think about. There is the banding together. We're seeing this banding together when it comes to Doge, especially this year. And we're seeing that federal workers are coming together. There's a federal worker network called FUN. I think it's Federal Unionist Network that I just learned about this the other day, in which former employees or existing employees are banding together because they are fighting automation in the federal government. I mean, Doge is promising to automate so much of work that exists, these people who have been career workers. And this is definitely not going to work. I mean, you're taking LLMs, putting them out of the box and trying to replace so much institutional knowledge at the federal government. It's going to fall flat on its face. And a lot of the work is trying to push back against that. And I think that resistance very much is possible. You shouldn't give in. I think a lot of it is because the narrative has been so dominated that resistance is futile. But we're not in a boring situation, bringing back to Star Trek. Resistance is very much possible, both kinds of in terms of banding of workers and also seeing where the economic headwinds are going, where the promise and the return has to be huge to actually return on the investment.
Thank you, Alex and Emily. Thank you so much for writing this critical book. Thank you so much for your podcast that highlights some of the bullshit and some of the necessary critiques that have to happen as well. So when is the book out? Where can people find it? When can they see you live?
The book is out May 13th in the US and affiliated markets, May 22nd in the UK and affiliated markets. And Alex had the brilliant idea to grab the URL thecon.ai, so you can find information about our book tour events there on thecon.ai. And we've talked about the podcast several times, but we didn't name it. It is Mystery AI Hype Theater 3000, wherever podcasts are available.
Thank you for listening to the Design of AI podcast. We provide a pragmatic and practical deep dive into what AI can do and how it's transforming industries. We help designers, researchers, and strategists excel in a rapidly changing future. Remember to follow us on your favorite podcasting app. It also really helps if you leave reviews. This episode was hosted by RP Figueredo, the founder and principal strategist of PH1 Research. If you want more AI strategy and research content, subscribe to our Substack newsletter at designofai.substack.com.